back working on the Ironhead today. I'm going to try and find out what this compression issue is. As I said, I think it's got, well, I bought it as having a stroker kit in it, so I'm presuming that it's got the wrong pistons in or something along those lines. So there's a couple of options. I can either sort of change whatever parts are wrong, or there's another option of possibly retarding the inlet cam timing, which gives it a lower static compression ratio. Due to the amount of compression it seems to have, I don't think this will be an option. I think it's going to want something more drastic. It's obviously against all I really want to do to lower the compression ratio, because high compression's cool, but in this case the bike's impossible to start, so it's been pushed a little bit too far, I think. So we'll get the engine stripped down and see what's going on. One of the things I've noticed here is this has got a Chinese copy of an S&S Super E carburettor on, and the inlet manifold is a standard inlet manifold, and it hasn't been ported out to accept the larger Ventura diameter of the Super E, so it's pointless having this carburettor on there. So this is sort of showing you that whoever's built this engine hasn't really taken much care into ensuring all the right parts are fitted. So the inlet manifold here, I'm just checking the spacing between the cylinder heads and the inlet manifold, because one of the options for fitting a stroker kit to an Ironhead was to install longer barrels. I think these are no longer available, but if you install longer barrels then the cylinder heads end up further apart and the inlet manifold has to be altered to suit that. The rear cylinder head is also extremely close to the frame, which could indicate that this has longer barrels on it. I'm having to wear latex gloves today, which makes it a little more awkward, but I caught my finger with the angle grinder yesterday, so trying to just keep my hands a bit cleaner. I'm not actually sure if the rear cylinder rocker cover is going to come off. It looks extremely close to the frame. It could be got long cylinders on it. So the cylinder head bolts on this are a 7/16 bi-hex, which I haven't actually got with me, so I'm going to have to nip into work and pick one of those up. So when taking the push rods out, we want to ensure that they go back in the same location. So a bit of cardboard with front written on it, some holes punched through, and just pop the push rods through the cardboard, and then they're held in the same positions. Undo the head bolts in the opposites. And now the cylinder head should pop off. The procedure is obviously the same for the rear head. and then we'll get some measurements and see what we're dealing with. Cams are quite a lot of wear and divots. Looks like it's being assembled from the parts bin of stuff because nothing quite matches. Like the inlet manifold was a standard inlet manifold with a Super E carb. And then it's got some expensive parts in it, like the stroker crank. So it appears that it's not the cam timing, it's at least 50 degrees after bottom dead centre the inlet closes. The piston part numbers Google up as being stroker pistons and should give 9 to 1 compression. The only other real logical explanation why it has so much compression is that the float was stuck in the carb filling the cylinders with petrol and hydrolocking. I did pull the plugs out and they didn't seem to be particularly wet, so that's still a bit confusing. I think probably the place to go from here is to find some way of CCing the cylinder heads and the domes of the pistons and use a DTI to check the cam times properly and work out what the static compression ratio is. It's not all bad though stripping it, because the big end has got a slight bit of play in it which would turn into detrimental play within a short period of time, and there's numerous stripped and broken bolts, threads and things throughout the engine, so it's worthwhile stripping it and going through it all and rebuilding it with peace of mind knowing that everything's right. So we've got the engine all stripped down now so we can have a good look at it. It's all cleaned up. Done a couple of repairs already on this. So the first one, it had a terrible oil leak. So the crankcase drain plug was badly damaged, so that's been welded up, machined flat and tapped for a new drain plug. The other thing, the problem that it had is the some of the studs on the casing were damaged, so they've been welded up. I'll drill and tap those and I'll actually fit studs to this, so it's easier to locate the gaskets and things like that. Really going to try and make this an oil tight Ironhead. It's horrible when we're leaking oil everywhere. Another thing that I have noticed when inspecting it is, if you look on this face here, there's a slight bit of damage, and that is in the oil weir that feeds the cylinder heads. So I'll weld that up and machine that flat to ensure that we don't get a loss of oil pressure and we get good oil flow to the cylinder heads, and it doesn't take any oil pressure away from the crankshaft. So the crankshaft, as you saw in the earlier video, had quite a bit of play. Well, not quite a bit, had a small amount of play up and down. So I've got the crankshafts stripped. This is the one that was at the bike. And if we compare it to a standard crank, so this is a stroker crank, and if you look at the difference in where the crank pin is compared with a standard crank, you can see how much bigger the throw is on the stroker crank. This one, the original, also had steel thrust washers, whereas this crank that I've stripped had the bronze thrust washers. So I've stripped this down and measured everything up. The crank pin is a standard crank pin, 1 1.25 inch. It marks out at, and there doesn't seem to be much wear in it. You can't feel anything on your finger, and when measuring it with the mic, it's still round, and there's no difference between the parts where the bearings have been running. So the crank pin's actually pretty good. The rods, however, have, I don't know if it'll show up on the camera, but there's quite a bit of wear in the rods. And when sort of measured the rods and mic'd them up, this set of rods has a good few thou worth of wear on them. They are still round, strangely, because usually you'd expect them to be ovalled, but there's quite a bit of wear on them. So I had this crankshaft which I've stripped. These are actually K model rods, the same as that was in the stroker setup. These rods measure out well. The crank pin is a 1.25" standard crank pin. So I'm going to put this back together because I'll be using this crankshaft. I remove the thrust washers so that I could turn them round, because you can actually just turn the thrust washers the other way around and get twice the wear out of them. So because I'll be using the steel thrust washers, I'm going to use the aluminium bearing cage that runs with a steel thrust washer. This one, because it's got bronze bushes, has the steel bearing cages. So I'll use the bearing set, the rods, and I have a new crank pin, which is a standard one, that I'll use just because I've got it, really. And this coming week I'll get the crankshaft put back together and trued up and finish repairing the cases, and then I'll install the crankshaft in the cases, and we'll go on about getting the engine back together and hopefully oil tight.